This event is focused on the future of stablecoins. So I just want to get a sense from the crowd. How many of you have heard of stablecoins? How many of you actually know how stablecoins work? Okay, so we have a pretty good crowd, because it's good to get a sense. Sometimes we want to know whether we're going for a high-level discussion or going in a little bit deeper, and it looks like this time we can go a little deeper. And so I'm really excited to have our panelists here. We have Matt from Reserve, we have Shannon from MakerDAO, and we have Raphael from Trust Token. And let's get started. This event is put on by the Stanford Blockchain Club, which is a interdisciplinary student group that focuses on blockchain across the graduate schools and the undergraduate schools here at Stanford. And hopefully you saw in the invite, you're more than welcome to join our mailing list. Whether you're a Stanford student or not, everyone is welcome to our events, and we hold events regularly, almost on a weekly basis. And it's great to have you all here. So let's get started first by having each of you introduce yourself, your role in the company that you're at, and maybe give a 2-minute overview of the coin that you're working on.
All right. So I'm Matt Elder from Reserve. I'm our CTO, sort of our technical co-founder. So Reserve, we are building a decentralized, distributed, stable currency. Going into the detail, what's the metaphor for this?
Is it stable as opposed? Is it pegged to US dollar? Maybe you give us
later. So the rough design is to peg to a just stable measure of value, where USD is not, specifically the value that it needs to stick to. Certainly early on, we're planning to have that be the peg, because that's just much easier for the market in general to understand. But that's not really an intrinsic part of the design. A decent metaphor for the way this works is actually the sort of gold standard proposed by Irving Fisher in 15, 16 on stabilizing the dollar, where essentially you can stabilize against a particular known index of value using a different pool of assets, so long as the assets that you're working with are sort of underlyingly sufficiently stable by allowing redemption in a principled way. More than that's going to be a lot of detail. So.
And do you want to get back on yourself as well?
Oh, on me. I have a research background in program verification, actually. So actually a lot of the interest that I have in the technical aspects of this are the intense security demands of the problem, which I'm sure I will wind up talking about. And then I've worked at another startup, Quixie, in the background. Previously, I worked at Google for a while, other sort of educational startup training things.
Cool. Hi guys, I am Shannon Wu. I am an alum, so it's really great to be back here. I'm very excited to be back on campus. I'll share a little bit about myself and how I got interested in stablecoins and blockchain in general, and then I'll also just give a very, very high-level overview about MakerDAO. So I was here on campus during the whole Bitcoin mania stuff, and it was really fun just to understand what was going on at the time, do some day trading. I think at the time there wasn't that much to be able to do or build off of. But it really resonated with me ideologically, just really being a proponent of wanting very efficient systems that, individuals would be able to participate in that weren't necessarily, being influenced by really inefficient different bodies out there, whatever industry this may be. So I ended up founding a marketing firm after I left Stanford. And at the time, I think there were people who were interested in held Bitcoin, but there wasn't a whole industry necessarily building on it. And I ended up diving into tech. And then on a personal note, just kept on following the scene. And then when Ethereum came up, it was just super fascinating how the internal politics worked and how things came up and the technology and what this meant for the whole industry, which is very, very exciting. And so then from there, I ended up actually diving in and then working with projects that were leveraging decentralized finance in some kind of really interesting way. So that meant, working with projects like Bloom and SpankChain and then ultimately MakerDAO. And I really ended up falling in love with the project because it's just such a fundamental layer of what we really need for the whole ecosystem to be able to scale this idea of, fully decentralized stability. And so before we can even talk about like what the future of finance is going to look like, there needs to be some kind of, underlying infrastructure. And so that's what MakerDAO really had this vision for. Plus the team was just super, super amazing, full of people with really, really brilliant, but also very passionate about what they were doing. So that's how I ended up joining. And I wrote, all of the blog posts going out, and I was tasked with the challenge of trying to explain what MakerDAO was in a time period that stablecoins was not even like an accepted term yet. So you guys can appreciate like how hard that was. And we have a very complex system that, it's taken some time to be able to actually be able to formulate in a way that, people of varying levels of understandings and backgrounds can be able to understand. So at a very high level, we're, the very first fully decentralized stablecoin. We're built on Ethereum. I guess before we dive into the actual facts, some interesting things about MakerDAO. So the stablecoin is called DAI. It's pegged, so essentially one DAI is equal to one USD. We're excited to share it's been just over a year since we first launched DAI. So we launched it December of last year in 2017. Super, super exciting. We have today 77 million DAI in circulation, which is a huge milestone, and I think speaks to a lot just of the adoption in the space in general, which is very, very cool. About 1.5% of the total supply of Ether is now locked up in CDPs in the MakerDAO smart contract system, which is super cool, big accomplishment. And I'm excited to dive in and share a little bit more about the system in general.
Cool. Hey, so I'm Raphael. I'm the co-founder of Trust Token, and I lead our engineering and product teams. Just so I have a sense of who's in the room, could you raise your hand if you're a computer science major or otherwise in engineering or something technical? And then who here is from the business school? Or maybe it's more on the finance side? Okay, all right. It's gonna be like 2/3, 1/3. Okay, so my background is also on the technical side. I'm also an alum from Stanford. I graduated in computer science here. And that's where I first got into cryptocurrencies and started to learn about them. And our company, Trust Token, is about connecting real-world assets to blockchains. And so we started with USD, and we made a product called TrueUSD. And has anyone heard of TrueUSD before? Wow, okay, cool. So TrueUSD is one of the largest stablecoins in the world. We've got a market capitalization of about $200 million today, and we only launched it back in March. So it's been a pretty fast growth rate just over the course of this year. And TrueUSD does about $50 million of trading volume per day. It's listed on Binance, OKX, Huobi, and many of the other top crypto exchanges in the world. And it's becoming increasingly used by traders globally, both inside of crypto and outside of crypto as well. So unlike Reserve and DAI, TrueUSD is backed by real US dollars sitting in a bank account. And so that means that you can take your TrueUSD and you can get real US dollars and you won't slip the market at all. And that's one of the reasons why traders really like TrueUSD as opposed to some of the alternatives. And we are interested in bringing more assets on blockchains. We're looking at doing other currencies such as potentially True Euro or True Yen, and are also interested in other kinds of assets like even debt. We're very interested in doing loans in TrueUSD and having loans that are tracked and monitored on the blockchain. We think that's a really large application of stablecoins like TrueUSD. That's it. There's a lot of really interesting technical problems that we're solving, as well as interesting regulatory, legal, financial problems that we have to solve as well. And so it's a really exciting mix of problems that are happening at our company.
So the stablecoin space tends to be really controversial because some people say that potentially by pegging it to the US dollar or by pegging it to real assets, it's going against the decentralization that blockchain is supposed to stand for. And so in your view, what is the value of stablecoins over traditional cryptocurrencies that aren't pegged to anything or aren't low volatility?
Okay, is that directed at me or for everyone?
To everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of value. I mean, some of the bigger ones are just that it's like, you know, true decentralization is so important, to be able to actually go out there and not have, you know, it necessarily being controlled by a government. I guess, is your question more so like within the stablecoin space in general, or are you talking about just currencies
Within the stablecoin space.
Within the stablecoin space, yeah. And I think, I mean, so basically, can you repeat the question one more time? Is your real question about why it has to be USD versus just a global currency basket in general?
No, what are the key benefits in having it be low volatility as opposed to just a traditional cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ethereum that is managed by the market?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building like any kind of financial product, you need some kind of stability for the future, right? So if you're taking on debt or you are, you know, doing anything kind of long term, you need people to be able to trust that the value is going to be maintained. So I think you guys can speak to this, you know, I'm sure in detail right after this as well. But it's just, you know, it's going to take a really long time for the space to develop if there isn't some kind of stable mechanism.
As almost like an infrastructure piece for the kind of programmable economy that that is the dream of like building out these smart contracts. The ability to sort of like lay out the distributed trust mechanisms that are built on top of a lot of these, you know, cryptocurrency platforms relies on essentially being able to stake tokens and have them slashed under particular conditions. Basically, you know, placing them in escrow and then having them technically vanish if you if you default on some action that you're supposed to take. And this means necessarily treating the kinds of tokens that you're dealing with as like objects of deferred payment. The amount that you need to be able to stake in order to reliably commit a certain bar of value to make sure that you don't just, you know, default on the actions that you're supposed to take, let the slashing happen with the tokens that you're going to leave there, and, you know, run off with the proceeds of, you know, faking out your business partner, is substantially lower if that is actually being done in a stable measure of value, if that's being done with stable tokens. And so those kinds of measures are going to be too expensive to run, I think, with something that's highly volatile if you need to like make a commitment in this way for, you know, a quarter or a year or what have you.
Well, Ethereum is moving to proof of stake, and they're going to do it with Ether. And
Yep.
I'd love if they would do it with a stable coin, but I think that's unlikely.
Yeah. But I mean, so similar kinds of contracts. So that idea of proof of stake is not just a backbone idea for running a blockchain, but is really a backbone idea for like being able to automate business.
Yeah, I definitely view it as many
Yeah.
other applications.
Yeah.
And hopefully stablecoins will be used in some of those other applications.
Yeah.
So with TrueUSD, we've seen that it has a stablecoins. The biggest market that exists right now for stablecoins. Does anyone know what it is?
Trading.
Just trading. That's right. So if you actually look, it's sort of a subtle thing that many people don't notice, is that if you look at all the crypto exchanges, there's a handful of ones that have actual fiat pairings, and that's, you know, exchanges like Coinbase has Coinbase Pro. There's Bittrex, which is here in the United States, and there's a bunch of other exchanges, mostly based in the United States, that have fiat pairings. But if you look at the largest exchanges like Binance, Huobi, OKX, none of them have fiat. And so if for a trader on those exchanges, if they want to have a place to be able to, you know, if they think Bitcoin's going to crash tomorrow and they want to go into something that's secure, then there are no options except for, you know, for a long time, there was only Tether. Has everyone heard of Tether? Cool. So that was the only option, and Tether was really untrustworthy. And part of the reason why we launched TrueUSD in March is because we saw Tether was really starting to go off the rails, and there was ravenous demand for a more trustworthy alternative. And so before that point, you had only Tether, or you could move your money onto an exchange like Coinbase Pro or Bittrex or one of the other exchanges that have fiat pairs. But now with the stablecoins that have been launching, like TrueUSD, you can go directly into a stablecoin on almost all the top exchanges. And that's very convenient for traders. And some people now are starting to use stablecoins just as their bank. Like people will just park $100,000 or even $1 million there and just let it sit. And people were actually using Tether for that before, but it was much less trustworthy. And so now they're starting to use some of these more trustworthy alternatives. But we think that there's a bunch of markets beyond what's already in crypto right now where stablecoins can be very useful. I think that all three of us believe that stablecoins are one of the best applications of blockchains because they give you a lot of the advantages that something like an Ethereum or a Bitcoin does, but without any of the price volatility. And so when you get into applications like being able to do remittances or payments like Venmo or Forex trading, for a lot of those applications, stablecoins become really attractive. So one example is that just in Forex, maybe you know that Forex has a 2 to 3 day settlement period. So like if we make a trade, USD for euro, that I won't literally get my USD for 2 to 3 days until after the trade happens. And that's pretty crazy. And the reason is because there's a whole lot of financial plumbing that happens behind the scenes whenever you do any Forex trade or really any kind of trade. And it involves a bunch of brokers and clearing houses and a lot of other stuff. But the cool thing about crypto is something like TrueUSD is that if I traded you a TrueUSD for a true euro, that exchange can settle in 15 seconds on the blockchain. And now I have my TrueUSD or I have my true euro directly in hand immediately. Now, if I actually want to cash that out to USD or cash that out to euro, then that's going to take a bank wire, and so that might take a little more time. But you get the crypto version immediately, you can get the bank wire version very quickly. And so that's an example of a very exciting application that we see these types of products being used for in the future.
For Trust Token, why did you decide to take the approach of being directly backed by real assets in banks?
Yeah, so I think of the three of us, TrueUSD is the only one that's directly backed by US dollars. And the reason why, what we've seen is that traders really like that property. And the reason why is because they want to be able to move between their stablecoin and USD without slipping the market. So what that means is if you have a stablecoin like a DAI or like Reserve, there'll actually be, there could be a DAI US dollar market, right? Because DAI ultimately is backed by ethers. You can take your DAI, you can get out ethers, and you can try to sell those to get to US dollars, but you pay fees along the way. And so you're going to end up paying, maybe it's 10 basis points, maybe it's 100 basis points before you get back to US dollars. But with something like TrueUSD, you can go from, there's no market between TrueUSD and US dollars, it's just backed one for one. So you can redeem your TrueUSDs. If you have 10,000 of them, we'll give you $10,000. If you have 1 million TrueUSDs, we'll give you $1 million. There's no trading, there's no fees involved when you try to go to US dollars. That's the number one thing that people like.
I mean, I think this is a good point that he's bringing up because, I think a lot of people, when they look at the stablecoin space, they just hear, the very, very high-level mechanisms. But what they don't understand is that there's differences between each of these stablecoins that have come out, and because of the mechanisms, they're used for different applications. So in this particular case, this is a really good example. Whereas, if you take an alternative model like DAI, the whole benefit is that it's fully decentralized. And it's not to say that they both can't coexist in an ecosystem, because even with a stablecoin like DAI that is backed by collateral right now, that's ETH, eventually it might also be backed by, fiat-backed stablecoins like TrueUSD. So, there's different reasons and methodologies you might use for deciding which stablecoin you want to implement. I guess for DAI, the biggest benefit is that, it eliminates all this counterparty risk, like you might see with what happened with Lehman, but also just existential risk just in general. So in this particular case, if you want to build a truly, truly decentralized application, you're going to need to get there. On the other hand, if you want something for a different reason, there's other stablecoins that you might look towards, there's other different ways that you might achieve it. I think what's really, really fascinating about the space right now is it really is just a melding of the minds to be able to understand all these different financial mechanisms and how they come into play when it comes into the blockchain space.
And Matt, for Reserve, you guys are taking a multi-phase approach. So can you go a little bit into that and why you decided to take a multi-phase approach?
So the current version of our white paper, in case people have seen this or not, we're actually expecting to develop. These are essentially developmental stages of the project that we're running. One of the reasons to develop sort of gradually and carefully in this way is to like actually get real evidence about what happens both in the market and technically under like what this implementation actually does when real humans wind up hitting it. And to not wind up committing to full decentralization prematurely in ways that will make fixing errors very, very expensive. So backing up again, this is a balance between several aspects. There's the need to be able to respond to things going wrong, to be able to like upgrade a contract if it's actually failing, if there was some subtle bug, as has happened on a lot of Ethereum contracts. You can like go through, the last several years of news about, smart contracts and all of the failures that have hit things. But to be able to actually get evidence about what is product market fit using a piece of technology of the token where it's not already committed to several previous years of like technical infrastructure work, but to actually reach full decentralization in the long run. And so,
can you describe those three phases?
Yeah, so I'll describe these three phases. Initially, we are essentially building a trust-backed token. We are building a fiat-backed coin that's actually very, very similar to TrueUSD. We are, interacting with a trust company. We are like building in interaction with them. This will essentially be a like centrally managed fiat token. We have laid out a sort of technical timeline that we can go from that state to a more and more decentralized version of the same operations. We can gradually decentralize the operations of this object. So we will start with the representations of our collateral entirely on chain. Even though these representations of collateral, this is like essentially things like TrueUSD. And then the technical elements, the contracts, the operations that we're needing to make can be sort of swapped out from centralized versions of them to decentralized versions as we learn, as we discover, sort of unknown unknowns in the implementation that we put together. This gets eventually to a fully decentralized stage, which is sort of the second stage that you're describing. In this second stage, we're expecting to still be like pegged to USD, but there is nothing that is specifically like USD in our vault among our collateral. From there, we are planning to automate through, mechanisms of governance and just like analysis of the market, things like, watching a CPI, building up some index that we can use to like peg to something that is not just the US dollar in order to peg not to dollars, but to stable purchasing power. So these are sort of like decreasing dependence on centralized mechanisms and increasing decentralization. And the reason to not just start at the fully decentralized thing is to actually like get faster learning, get faster feedback on what is working and what is not, and be able to have like failure modes be more recoverable.
How long do you guys project to get there?
You're asking an engineer for timelines.
Like when is phase one actually going to launch and phase two? You're thinking like
phase one
years?
will launch soon.
Okay.
Intuitively, I'm actually expecting this entire process to take a few years, 2 to 3 years. But that's intuitively. Again, this is relatively novel development. This is like a different development methodology than I've seen anyone use or talk about before. And so trying to lay out like, and exactly how long does this kind of thing take is guessing. Yeah.
Raphael, for Trust Token, do you guys see yourself sticking with your current model, or do you see yourself also shifting more towards a decentralized model?
Nope. Sticking with the current model. We've got an interesting mix here because we've got a model it's fully backed by fiat, and then DAI is a model where it's completely backed by crypto, and then Reserve is it sounds like is going to be starting with fiat and then transitioning into crypto.
Mm-hmm.
So all kinds of
Very
different perspectives
diverse.
here. But our perspective is that what we've been hearing from traders is that they love the fact that you can go from US dollars directly to the coin and the coin to US dollars. And if you move to a model where you're backed by crypto, then you lose this core thing. And another thing that we've learned is that also it's actually the things like stability mechanisms and such are actually not the right thing to focus on. I know maybe 6 months, a year ago, a lot of folks were talking about, well, how do you keep stablecoins stable, questions like that. What we've learned is that really this is about building a great product and having great marketing and growth and getting traders to use your products and figuring out what are the other markets that can use your product and trying to build the highest quality thing you can. That's what we found. It's become a much more competitive market where we have other coins like USDC, GUSD, Paxos, which have been launching and are competing for some of the same market share. And it's just you have to build the best product you possibly can.
So in your case, your main customers right now are traders. For everyone else, who do you see as being your customer?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different folks who use DAI. We've done over 200 integrations and partnerships with other companies out there, which has been very exciting. I think DAI is used everything from within the supply chain. We just did a major partnership with TradeShift. We've partnered with Wire. I think the way we see the ecosystem is very much like a very far out vision. Like we kind of joke within the company of like the timelines are like really, really long and out there as far as like the goals that we want to achieve, which is really inspiring. But it's good for everyday people who just want stability, who might, purchase DAI off of some exchange, all the way to folks that want a little bit more complexity within the financial products that they're looking at. So what I think is what's really cool about DAI is that it's like, if you're just interested in pure, like, I want to hold this because I don't want to deal with the volatility of the ecosystem, great, you can just hold it in DAI. But, the way that it's actually managed is through this CDP system. So you lock up collateral in this thing called the CDP, and from it you generate DAI. And so what's really cool is that this same autonomous like smart contract system that is able to keep DAI towards its peg is actually the same thing that enables a lot of creativity within the financial world. Because you can go, there's all these different, depending on if you think Ethereum is going to go up, going to go down, depending on what your personal goals are. There's just a lot of really cool things. You can take out loans, and this is the kind of stuff that I think makes DAI a very flexible and also very creative system, is because of that. It does take quite a bit, I think, of understanding to actually fully realize all the nuances of it. But then once you do, it's really interesting.
How can DAI keep up with CDP demand? How can DAI keep up with CDP demand? For example, if I wanted 100 million DAI, I can't get it. You need somebody to lock up how much.
So that's a good question, because this has actually been something that we've thought about really, really heavily, which is, being very pragmatic with the approach of how we want to, how much to release. Because for any kind of new innovation, right, we didn't really want to just unleash it upon the world and just say hey, here it is in the fully decentralized end result, end product. Kind of as Matt was mentioning, it's been done in phases. And so we've also thought a lot about okay, what would be the instance in which somebody wanted this really copious, massive, amount of DAI. And so to date, over 5,000 CDPs have been opened, but we do have a limit as far as how much can be actually created, and that's getting increased over time, and that's getting, more and more flexible, so to speak. And then when multi-collateral DAI launches later this year, that will enable even more stuff to happen, which is really cool. But I think in the time being, kind of to answer your question, those are the good things to think about, because I think it would be really disastrous for the space if somebody were to just come out and unleash this kind of unthoughtful product without being actually stress tested at any given moment. I mean, like I'll tell you, I think the thing that was craziest about DAI in like the last year was like, hey, the worst thing already happened. Like, you know, Ethereum dropped 90% within a few months. It was like, you know, that was like a holy shit moment for sure. But then DAI maintained its peg, which is super, super cool to see. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we were like, oh, like, you know, we know this is going to work. But then the worst thing ever happened, and then we were totally fine. So now it's like, okay, now it's just a progression and like figuring out, okay, the next release which is going to be multi-collateral DAI, and I think it'll make things a lot easier.
We thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we were excited.
It dropped 90% and that
Yeah,
DAI is still okay. That was neat.
that was, yeah, it was a little crazy.
So I mean, we haven't launched yet, and so like actual product market fit hasn't been really tested. We've been staring a bunch at use cases in emerging markets. Essentially, like how can one deal with what are essentially inflationary and occasionally hyperinflationary currencies? Are there sort of ways that we can provide escape routes for users in those regions? And that goes into a lot of detail, and there's, you know, a lot of difficulty there, but there's like really interesting products that might be made in this space. Also just sort of straightforward like wealth management makes a lot of sense for these purposes. If we can actually provide something that is like in the long run more stable in purchasing power than global currencies, then like that will be like a major win and like a very useful asset to be able to have as like an extremely liquid option.
So we're at the 20-minute mark to go. So now at this time, I'm going to open up to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, raise your hand and then I'll call on someone. So to get us started, you right there.
Yeah. So this is kind of more particular to trust token. So, but I'm curious, when I look at the token, there's a circulating supply around 200 million, 202. I just checked now, Coinbase, right?
Yeah.
But there's a market cap of 270 million, 275. And in a stable coin, where is that delta being created or generated? What constitutes that delta?
I got it. What's your name?
Andre.
Andre. So Andre, are you looking at coin market cap or at Coinbase or what?
Coinbase.
At Coinbase. Okay, so a lot of these folks like CoinMarketCap, Coinbase, when they're reporting the prices, so when they say the market capitalization, you're saying the circulating supply is 203, 202?
It's a 275 market cap, 202 circulating supply.
Okay, so the circulating supply, that's the number of true USDs that are circulating.
Right.
The market capitalization is the number of true USDs times the price of a true USD.
Right.
And a lot of these price trackers, yeah, so a lot of these price trackers like CoinMarketCap and so on, they'll often report the price of a true USD as $1.01. If you actually go look at the exchanges, you'll find that they are incorrect, and that true USD is almost always within, I'd say, 30 basis points of a dollar. So it's 1.0030, you know, if it's high, and you know the similar amount if it's low. It's very rarely, it's almost never actually at 1.01. And this has to do with errors in the way that they're calculating the prices.
Right.
Calculating the price of something like true USD is not necessarily easy because there aren't many true USD versus USD markets, which is kind of the obvious way to get the price of a true USD in terms of US dollars. There are true USD versus BTC markets, but then you need to know what the price of the BTC is. And the price of the BTC is not the same all over the globe. And so it's actually quite a complex problem where you're talking, well, there's a certain premium that BTC trades at in some of the Asian exchanges or Korean exchanges. And so that's the sort of thing that these price trackers get wrong when they're trying to compute the price of a true USD. But you can be confident that a true USD is almost always will be trading at $1 because we have very big market makers that have tens of millions of dollars and they're market making on true USD. And if true USD is ever trading a little bit above $1, then they'll just sell into the market and they're making money. And if true USD is ever trading beneath $1, they'll buy true USD off of the market and they're making money. And so they'll arb away almost any difference. The only times when differences can open up is if we have a major new exchange listing, for example, and let's say that coincides with a time when banks are closed, like on the evenings or weekends. And during those times, you can't actually mint more true USD because to mint more true USD, you have to actually deposit US dollars to back those true USD. Then you get new true USD.
How do you incentivize developers? I mean, in this community, you have fiat-backed currency, well, at least in this case, you have fiat-backed currency. Where's the money coming? In the case of, let's say, EOS or something, a big ICO, they raise all this money, throw millions of dollars at developers. How do they do that in your ecosystem?
Good question. So I'd say our developer ecosystem still needs a lot of work. We just recently pushed a new feature to our smart contracts, which is specifically targeting developers that are interested in working with TrueUSD and using it in a smart contract. What's your name, by the way?
Steve.
Steve. So Steve, are you familiar with how Solidity smart contracts work?
Not technical.
Who here has actually written a smart contract or developed smart contracts before? Okay, all right, a handful of people. So currently with TrueUSD, actually we just updated this feature, but previously with TrueUSD, just like with DAI or with most other stablecoins, if you have a smart contract, and if someone sends that smart contract TrueUSD or sends that smart contract DAI, the smart contract doesn't ever know about that. And the reason is because if I send you TrueUSD, then what's actually happening is there's a TrueUSD smart contract. I'm just telling the TrueUSD smart contract, please update Steve's balance by $10 and deduct $10 from my balance. And so I'm sending you 10 TrueUSD. But this smart contract, it doesn't ever inform you. And if I'm sending TrueUSD to a smart contract, then I'm just telling this TrueUSD smart contract to update balances, and it doesn't ever inform that smart contract. But a feature that we just recently pushed that's in our new version of the smart contracts, we just launched it, specifically targeting smart contract developers and giving them something new that I think will be pretty exciting, is that we have a feature where when someone sends TrueUSD, our smart contract will actually call your smart contract. And that's very useful because that now allows you, if you're a dApp developer, or let's say you're building a DEX, a decentralized exchange, you can now automatically have your smart contract take actions whenever someone deposits TrueUSD or sends in TrueUSD. So those are the types of things that we're constantly innovating on and pushing forward to figure out ways to make it easier for smart contract developers and for other kinds of application developers to use TrueUSD.
Yeah, I guess to speak on behalf of Maker, I think, so we never did an ICO. Andreessen did purchase a sizable portion of MKR because they'll be participating in the governance, so that was helpful. And then I think the other interesting part is that the ecosystem is kind of, so there's two parts. There's like the developers that are actually like working on the infrastructure itself, and then there's like folks in the space who just want to engage with the ecosystem with the product as it is, and they're independent, right? And so the project itself is kind of built so that once it becomes fully decentralized, like you're kind of like working yourself out of a job, right? Like the goal is that you are eventually able to like unleash this into the world, and then other folks and entities, because there's appropriate incentives for them to use it, would be able to manage it and do it. So for Maker, this is managed by MKR holders who are active participants within the governance process, as well as keepers. And there's arbitrage opportunities as an incentive to be able to help DAI maintain its peg and enable like CDP management. And so there's just all these like different like layers of like financial incentives that I think make it very beneficial. But yeah, it's an interesting question because I think it's something that a lot of projects in this space have had to deal with. It's just like, how is this going to get built? What is that going to look like? And then also just to be thoughtful about like regulatory issues and everything.
At some point, I'd like to give away some Trust Token
God.
t-shirts. All right, would anyone be interested in a Trust Token t-shirt? I got a medium.
I'll take it.
All right, you got one.
We could use it for lecture.
All right,
I feel like Oprah.
I got a small and I got a medium.
Small.
Yeah.
Small? All right, you got a small right there. I got one for medium. All right, medium in the back. You got one. All right.
Nice.
How many plus
Oh. Also, so this is my colleague Ryan in the back. We're going to be giving away a Trust Token branded ledger. It's the best hardware wallet on the market. It's custom made, limited edition, Trust Token after this event, if you come and connect with Ryan or with me on LinkedIn, we're going to be randomly selecting someone, and we will get this ledger to you. So.
Nice. Okay, question.
That's why you're late, huh?
In the back.
Picking up the product.
Yeah, you.
Okay, I have one question about DAI, one question about the dollar. So I guess the question for DAI is, what does the world look like in which Ethereum is not wildly successful, but DAI is thriving? Like, you know, because like my understanding of the system is basically there is some rough constraint on how much DAI you can have relative to the total market cap of Ethereum. And so is there a world in which Ethereum is not like used for literally everything, but DAI is still successful?
Yeah, so there's actually two parts to this question because within DAI, Ethereum is used as collateral, but then it's also used as like the basis, as the underlying layer. So I think there might be a world, right, in which DAI is wildly successful, in which Ethereum doesn't become the primary block, doesn't become a primary primary chain that everybody's, using. And so maybe it's something else. Maybe it's another one that hasn't even been created yet. But I think like that's not a super productive conversation to even have because it's like when that time comes, it's like everybody will have to migrate and there will be new projects that are built off of it. So I think in that sense, it's like that shouldn't. Ethereum still has a lot of innovations to be figured out as well, and there's a lot of folks who are working on it. And so I think from a development standpoint, it's like, okay, well, this is the best that we have right now, and so it makes sense to continue. And then from like a perspective on a collateral side, like multi-collateral DAI is getting released this year, and so it won't just be Ethereum; it'll be all types of, it could be. There's a lot of different types of collateral, and so there's this big boat that's going to be coming up in which new collateral types are going to be put up to vote and voted in to be able to create and issue DAI as well. So it won't just be Ethereum in the very near future, which will be very exciting.
I think this question is actually based on a financial misconception that I think if you think about it carefully, you'll see that if there was $50 billion worth of demand for DAI, then as people are buying DAI and folks are locking up more Ether, it'll actually just increase the price of Ether. And so I don't think that the price of Ether should be seen as a cap on the potential market capitalization of DAI. Basically, the more demand for DAI, it'll just turn into demand for Ether because Ether will have to be locked up out of circulating supply to be able to create the DAI.
In the world of single collateral.
In the world of single collateral. In the world of multi-collateral, it'll be some sort of collateral needs to be locked up, depending on what the set of collateral is.
So in the world of multi-collateral, and I've been like, there's a separate risk that's important to consider. It's one that we have to deal with as well. There is further a problem where if the token in which, or the pool of tokens, whatever they might be, in which the like rewards and punishments for validators is not as valuable as sort of like the pool of collateral that's being staked there are like real security threats to, it's like, well, it becomes actually like cost effective to attack the system. And so that can sort of only really happen if the underlying systems are also going like massively multi-collateralized and there's like these other kinds of tokens are also available for staking in something like Casper.
But don't you think that like it's kind of like a nuanced thing because over time, like these are the kinds of issues that like with like a committee of people overseeing it, eventually, they will say like, hey, these pieces of collateral like are no good because it's causes too much risk, or like these ones are and these like are legit and like will hold value over time.
So I'm not saying that this is not a manageable risk.
Yeah.
Just that it is a consideration.
Yeah,
so the kind of space that you're describing, the kind of like problem world that you're describing is one where like that's essentially already failed. So you kind of like shouldn't wind up in that space, I think. So, more questions?
Here. Oh, Alicia, yeah, go ahead.
you explain a little bit more about how reserves vault works? I mean, you just keep getting multi-collateral. I don't really know. It's a basket of crypto assets, or
I mean,
how does it work? Or how might it work? I guess.
how does the vault work? Can I describe how the vault works without describing the entire system? I mean, the vault is just, okay, there are three assets in the reserve system, or three pools of assets in the reserve system. There's the reserves, there's reserved shares, and there's all of the other things that are locked up as collateral in the vault. And this can be like multi-collateral, it's relatively straightforward to set up. But that's just a smart contract that is holding these assets, that is holding the pool of assets that back the reserves. And so it's as if you're maintaining a peg in the normal way. That is what is honoring redemptions, and that is what is accepting the assets for minting new reserves. Does that answer your question?
Close enough.
All right, yeah.
We don't need to
And then, yeah, if you want the hour-long version, like, come see me afterwards.
See, here in the front.
So I have a specific question on the development of the multi-collateralization for DAI. I mean, what sort of like simulation models and stuff would you start testing in terms of deciding, the reserve ratios and stuff you're going to have? And also, I also wonder if you start introducing fiat currencies into the system, aren't you just moving this whole idea about decentralization back to the whole centralized idea and hence lose the benefit of having that?
Yeah, so your first question is about what the governance model looks like and how people are going to assess risk and what does that look like. And your second question is if fiat-backed assets are getting introduced as collateral, is that counter to kind of the decentralized model? So I guess the first question is really sorry, I totally blanked out. The first question is about just the model in general and governance. So
different type of stress testing and simulations.
So this is something that's super important to us because governance has been huge for us since day one, and so I think it's a very complicated factor, right? It's not enough just to be oh, do we like this? As you have to build out models to actually make that work, and so that actually introduces a very, very real and very complicated governance process to be able to assess what is the risk and in what ways and what parameters do you want to take in. And so that's actually the job of MKR holders, is to be able to assess this. But that being said, that's not to say we haven't built out models to really stress test it. We put out this really intensive series called our governance series on the blog recently. I think you should definitely check it out because it goes into very, very specific detail about how we see the process working and how this is going to look like. There have been several very successful votes that have already happened, but as things get more and more complicated, education is going to be a really big component of it. So I think you should definitely take a look at that. And then the second question is just as other kinds of assets get introduced, I think it's not a question of saying if these individual components, they don't all have to be decentralized. I think what's important is the system is decentralized, and that it can be managed in a way that's not, you're not taking on counterparty risk of one central entity or something really, really big and existential. It's about people being able to vote and be able to vote things in and vote things out, if a system is good or bad. It's not to say that everything in this whole ecosystem has to be amazing or perfect in every single way, because that's just not how it's going to work. There are gonna be inefficiencies, but the idea is that because there's real financial incentives for it to be efficient, eventually it will tend towards that. And the real beauty of it is that it is decentralized, that it's not just a committee of people coming together in a boardroom being we like this one, we don't like this one, we think this, this asset's really hot. So I think that's hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Sorry, just quickly, but what if over time people just have this tendency to start opening more safely with dollar, for example, just because it's the simplest way to do that, then say US government, it's easier for them say to lock up certain accounts and stuff, and hence having control over these people, and hence getting rid of that decentralized tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the individual risk that each of these assets might take on. But like if you're looking at just the decentralized system in general, it's like, how would they know who would they go after? There's not really a company, there's not really like an individual they'll be able to identify. I think those are like kind of the issues that will get partitioned out in the ecosystem as they happen, and it'll be up to each of these assets to be like regulatorily compliant and be able to deal with the issues in their own way. Like we're seeing this across, there's each country has their own things, and different assets have their own like regulations attached to it. But if you do have more questions, Bamsey, don't get mad at me pointing out, but we have an engineer on the team who's actually building this stuff out. So if you guys have any really specific questions about the background, go to him afterwards.
Okay, last question.
Awesome. So this has been a wonderful opportunity here for all of you. Thank you for spending your time tonight and sharing a little bit about your projects with us. Just a simple question. I guess it's a two-part question. Do you think that the world of stablecoins will ultimately be dominated by a single stablecoin? If so, why is your approach going to be that one that dominates? And if not, how do you see the ecosystem, and how do you think your approach fits in? And for each of you.
I don't think the world is going to be dominated by a single stablecoin. What's your name, by the way?
Alex.
Alex.
Yep.
Alex, I don't think the world is going to be dominated by a single stablecoin. I think it's going to be a mix, and there will be different stablecoins for different applications. Like folks that really care a lot about decentralization may prefer DAI. Folks that just want to have liquidity and something that's easy to use may use TrustUSD. But I think that I think that the largest market share will be held by ones that are backed by fiat, because from what we've seen, that's what people want the most. And so far, that's been true. I think the ratio is very overwhelmingly towards coins that are backed by fiat. So there's maybe the total market cap of stablecoins backed by fiat is something like 2 billion or so. And I think the total market cap of coins of DAI's type is more like maybe 80 million. And so I think the market will be overwhelmingly on the fiat side. But I think that there'll always be multiple types.
I think that's just the way the world is right now, and we're not even talking about. I mean, these are small stakes right now. There's a very, very much a much bigger play here, and so I think the way that we see things is just that it's like we want to be able to provide this underlying infrastructure that other people can leverage and use. Absolutely believe that there's going to be many different types of the possible stable coins, or even other like hybrid models for really, really niche, like specific aspects of what people are looking for. I think in our world, it's like, hey, if this can all happen in a decentralized way and provide an option and opportunity for folks who really do want to go down this method, then we'll be happy, and there'll be many more products to come, which I think will like blow our minds, and it will be really, really interesting to see. But it's just so early, and to kind of go for like the short-term wins that would possibly undermine the future goals of the project would make it very challenging. But I do think it's important that like lots of these models exist today, because this is kind of like what needs to happen to keep the ball moving. And it's important that traders are, active. It's important that there's an ecosystem. It's important that, there are accurate tools that folks can use. I mean, there's just so much opportunity in the space, even within just trading in general. It's like, there's the user experience in the space right now is horrible. So, and much less like the accuracy and scams, and there's all these kind of issues that need to be resolved. But I think that it will get done over time.
Also, no, just because these different designs yield different profiles of cost and different kinds of risk, regulatory risks, sort of like third-party risks in like who's being trusted where. What kinds of systems are being used, and also just how expensive are those mechanisms underlying, how expensive are they to operate, how expensive is it to actually do transactions if you're doing a specific kind of thing, what kinds of financial details are being depended upon to maintain stability. Different markets and different use cases. I mean, these are financial instruments. People are going to optimize for the cases that work best for what they need. And a large amount of capital is going to go wherever it's best fit. And that's not always going to be the same thing. So there are two-sided markets in these spaces where like you probably will see like, you know, a dominant stable coin or a dominant like other object being used for particular kinds of markets. But I don't think anything is going to dominate the entire market.
That was a great question to wrap up on. Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah, so if this was your first event, it was really great to have you, and hopefully you can come to future events. Be on the lookout for events on our mailing list. We also have our Slack channel. We also have our Facebook group. So through any of those means, you can stay up to date on our events. We also have career fairs that we organize. We have reading groups. So there's all kinds of ways to get involved with the Stanford Blockchain Club and the wider Stanford blockchain community. And if you're coming to an event again after visiting us before, it's really great to have you back, and hopefully we can continue seeing you at future events. And let's give a round of applause to all of our panelists.